By contrast, Christian theologians who continue to hold the inherited view, this is the older view, before and after Scotus, denied that God belonged to the same order or type of existence as his creation. Notwithstanding the differences that, Scotus thought, continue to distinguish the reality of God from that of creatures, for example, his infinite and perfect power, his sovereignty, his wisdom, and so forth, Scotus's move made God mappable on the same set of coordinates as his creatures. Robert Barron's actually a Catholic priest in the United States. He's on the same metaphysical level, ontological level. Extraordinary. It had the effect of moving the ironic quotation marks implicit in the traditional concept of God. According to Scotus, God does not exist. He exists. So as you can see, hopefully, on the screen, when you remove the quotation marks, he's not a special category, unique category. He exists, I exist, God exists, everything exists. It all shares that same property in the same way, existence. Now, this matters, and we'll come to the consequences, the unintended consequences, in a second. But we're just mapping out now the fundamental philosophical and metaphysical paradigm shift that happened with Duns Scotus in Scotland, and how it affected everything afterwards in momentous, unintended, unimaginable ways. So our author continues. In and of itself, Scotus's move need not have mattered much. After all, who cares? Just one dude in Scotland in the 14th century. But it belonged to the stratosphere of high intellectual culture and was shared only among a small number of educationally privileged male clerical elites. So again, very insignificant, you'd think. It was written in a language that only a tiny percentage of the population could understand, i.e. Latin, and it was transmitted only by means of hand-copied manuscripts among male teachers in friars' studia, and the three great universities at that time were Paris, Oxford, and Cambridge, with faculties of theology. And this was before the 1340s. The social, political, wider cultural, and economic impact of Scotus's ideas in the early 14th century, a tumultuous period for the church and for his Franciscan order, was nil. So the immediate impact was precisely zero. So why bother with it, he asks? Well, because history is the study of human change over time in all of its dimensions, not just the assessment of short-term influence viewed in social, political, cultural, or economic terms. Partly because of its relationship to default ideas about God, born of ordinary linguistic grammar, the unforeseen long-term influences of Scotus's move have been enormous. By predicating being of God and creatures univocally, in other words, in the same way, in the same clear sense, Scotus brought both within the same conceptual framework. Back to Bill Nile again. God exists, he exists, we exist, he exists in space-time, we exist in space-time. We're all on the same level, according to Scotus. This seems to be the implication, at least. However much God differs from creation, in other words, he's even stronger, even more powerful, even more infinite in knowledge, even more and more. It seems to be a question of degree, really, doesn't it, rather than a fundamental kind. However much God differs from creation, according to Scotus, the fact of his existence necessitates that he belongs to a more encompassing reality with creatures, one defined by being, conceived in its most abstract general sense. This would prove to be the first step, and here we have the kicker, the first step towards the eventual domestication of God's transcendence, a process in which the 17th century revolutions in philosophy and science would participate, not so much by way of dramatic departures as by improvising new parts on a stage that had been unexpectedly transformed by the doctrinal disagreements among Christians in the Reformation era. So I'm going to leave it there for the moment. But if we draw a trajectory from these very early days of Scotus, who domesticated, as he puts it, the domestication of God's transcendence. No longer is he so radically other, no longer is he so utterly transcendent and before and behind the universe eternally. He occupies the same metaphysical, he is being, we are being, he exists as a being, we exist as being on the same metaphysical level. God is reduced to the same level we are, and you see the eventual domestication of God's transcendence, where God becomes a being in space-time.